Hey there, welcome to the Jewish Adulting Podcast. Thank you for joining me today on your adulting journey. Before we get started, can you do me a quick favor? Can you hit the like and subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to this? I promise it's not a lifetime commitment, but when you don't subscribe, it's kind of like coffee without caffeine. What are we even doing here? Or like latkes without applesauce? Are we even living our best life? When you subscribe, you not only give me warm, fuzzy feelings, but you're also helping me bring amazing guests who rely on subscriber counts to know whether joining me is a worthy endeavor. More subscribers mean more epic conversations for you. And hey, if you're feeling extra generous, you can also show your support by becoming a monthly supporter at buymeacoffee.com/Jewish adulting. Whether it's $1, $5, $10, or even $20, every little bit helps make this podcast rolling. Of course, if you're sitting on a cool million or even looking to sponsor the show, reach out to me at jewishadulting@gmail.com. Also, I'm always looking out for engaging, thoughtful, passionate guests to join me. So if you want to nominate someone or want to come on the podcast yourself, reach out. Let's make a podcast shidduch.
This is Rabbi Ben-Zion Schaefer of the Shmuz.com. Jewish adulting is about shining a light on parts of ourselves in order to do Avodas Hashem with all the tools and resources at our disposal. It is an honor and a privilege to have every day to further refine our character and grow closer to Hashem. Take advantage of these opportunities before it's too late.
Good evening, everybody. This is your host, Chevra Rose of the Jewish Adulting Podcast. I have with me Elissa Felder. And Elissa actually comes to us. Where are you actually? Where in the world are you?
I live in Providence, Rhode Island.
Right. I knew that. Providence, Rhode Island. And you have the Core Communities of Practice. That's an organization that you'll tell us a little bit more about. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to do what you're doing now and what it is that you're doing so that people understand why this conversation, the context of this conversation with you.
Okay. That's a big question. So I'll take it in little snippets. I grew up in the UK. I grew up in London. I grew up in a home that was a traditional Jewish home. It's not a religious Jewish home. However, at the time that I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, that meant that one went to an Orthodox synagogue, even though we drove there. Mm-hmm. And my parents were not particularly knowledgeable about religious things. They were very connected to the Jewish people and to Israel, etc., but not to the religion and the religious beliefs. And I also grew up in a home where we did not talk about death. We didn't talk about anyone who died. We didn't talk about my grandparents when they died. It was a very not talked about subject, which I don't believe helped me as my life progressed, and I had some very significant losses that I didn't have language for, and I didn't know how to enter into that space of loss and grief because I had no language for it, and I had no beliefs from which to hang on to ground me as I lost some very significant people. So the love story began with my meeting my husband in London. He was an American, he was a serviceman, he was a doctor in the US Air Force stationed in the UK. And he was all the things, he was an American and he was a captain and a doctor and he was Jewish and all the things that was very attractive, obviously. And we got married in 1985 and we immediately moved to Washington, D.C. and we lived there for a few years. During that time, we wanted to start our family, which took us a little bit of time, which is another story unto itself. And we were blessed with a baby who was born in the spring of 1989. Little Sam was born with a number of congenital abnormalities, the biggest of which was a heart defect. And in October of 89, he went in for open heart surgery where he was going to be fixed and everything was going to be great. And he wasn't fixed and he didn't come out of the operating room. He died on the operating table. And I was 26 years old and I had no language. I did not know what happened. I didn't anticipate this. I didn't know what to do with this reality. I completely imploded and became completely paralyzed. I didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to step into the world without him. And yes, he was only a 4.5-month-old baby, but I had poured my whole life into him, that 4.5 months of his life, and taking care of him and looking after him and yearning for him and hoping for him and praying for him and all the things. And then when he died, that was such a huge slammed door shut in my face. And I needed to know. I needed to know what happened to him. I needed to know where he went. I wanted to know if he was okay. I wanted to know what happens. What does Judaism teach about death and the afterlife? And where did my baby go? And is he okay? And does he need me? And it was like a tailspin of grief and emotion and loss and love and all the different things that I didn't know how to cope. And here I am, actually 35 years later. We just celebrated his yahrzeit. He died on the second day of Cheshvan. And we are now just had his 35th yahrzeit. So it's a long journey.
So at that time, you were still traditional?
I would say we were traditional. You know, life's a journey of growth and learning and experiencing. And so, yes, we belonged to an Orthodox synagogue. There's a little synagogue in Georgetown in D.C. called Kesher Israel. That was our makom. That was the place where we went. And that was the place I prayed for him to be healed. That was the place where I prayed for the strength to live. It was the place where our friends hugged us and loved us and took care of us and took care of him during Shiva, which I don't remember much about. However, some things I do remember. One of which was a friend of mine coming to me and saying, you know, Elissa, so I started a little Chevra Kadisha. I put together a group of women from the community and we took care of Sam. We made sure that he had a proper kosher burial. So again, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that means. Yes, I want a kosher burial. Yes, I want him buried. And I didn't know what that meant. And so again, a journey of learning and trying to understand and seeing how beautiful our tradition is and how beautiful our practices are. And that again, I'd like to weave into this conversation the notion of love, the love we have for each other, the Jewish people have for each other, how we take care of each other and how we take care of our dead is so supremely loving and honorable and dignified to the extreme that it's a shrouded, excuse the pun, it's shrouded in mystery. It's not something people talk about. And yet since I'm a very out there person and I speak a lot and I share my things I've learned, you know, you learned the Aleph Base, so you teach the Aleph Base. So I learned things and I wanted to tell other people about these things. I was like, I didn't know that. So it's become a little bit of a quest of mine to share some of the information in order to bring comfort and inspiration. And now in a world where there's a lot of cremation and other ways of dealing with the dead, to share with knowledgeable Jews about what it is so that they know how to choose this as an option.
Right. So there is a lot we could talk about. And actually, right before we even pressed record on the podcast, you know, you were like, where are we going to go with this conversation? And I told you, quite frankly, I'm not sure because there's a lot that I don't know. And so I'm not sure how much we'll be able to actually cover. But you have written a book about your experiences and about the Chevra Kadisha. Is that correct?
Yes, I wrote a book. It was not something I considered or thought about doing. However, the more I speak about it, just anecdotally, in Kiddushes, at my Shabbos table, wherever I go, I feel like this is a topic that I get very animated about. My subsequent children make fun of me. Mom, you get so excited when you talk about death. Yes, yeah. I do. I'm very excited to share what I know because I feel like it's like, wow, let's talk about this.
Right. Well, I think there's a lot to talk about, which is what I was trying to say, which is that there's a lot of angles that we could go at. And I'd like to start with what exactly happens, you know, as where someone is preparing to die. Right. So generally the Chevra Kadisha is called it. Now, what I know, I went to Beis Yaakov. I grew up. Again, we didn't talk about the Chevra Kadisha. I don't even know if I really knew what that was. Maybe someone said it once and I was like pretending that I knew what that was. But like my family didn't talk about it. And so even after my mother died, where you would think that I would have a more intimate knowledge of like what exactly they did. I mean, I know Tahara and Shmira and that you're going back from whence you came and like cleaning and like I really don't know. I know very little. Okay. So from if you could just give us like, you know, the elevator pitch about the role of what the Chevra Kadisha does. But I think more importantly, you alluded to the fact that people, that we have an extreme reverence and respect for the human body, even in life and in death. So I think the first place I'd like to start is, tell me about the Chevra Kadisha's role in the death and dying process.
So let's even go back a little bit. Let's take one step back even.
Okay.
So, I'm sharing with you the things that I have learned along the way, what I found to be comforting in my journey with grief. And just to add another layer to this, that very shortly after Sam died on the second day of Cheshvan, and then the following Seder night, my mother died in London. And so there were these two very deeply loved people that I lost, like back to back. And so when you're plunged into this grief mode, and then you want to know. So the things I'd learned after Sam died was so helpful when my mother died. So the idea of understanding death means that we also have to understand life. What is life even? What is life?
Right.
Life is the coupling of a holy, God-given, breathed into us soul that comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, comes from God, and is breathed into us. The first man, Adam, was physical, organic matter fashioned into a body with a holy soul blown into it, right? We read that in Genesis, in Bereshit. And we are that. After Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then now there's death in the world. Death as a way to get us back to Adam pre-fate. The fate of Adam and Chava necessitated there to be death in the world. Once they were exiled from the Garden of Eden, their physical bodies became more pronounced. They changed who they were, essentially. In the Garden of Eden before the Chet, they were more soul and a little bit of body, a wisp of body. This is the way Rabbi Tatz describes it, a wisp of body and a huge soul. Adam could see from one end of the world to the other. And after they ate from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, the soul goes more inside and is blocked and hidden by the body, the physical body, which we sometimes refer to as our hide. So outside of the Garden of Eden, we are made up of a soul which is embedded inside of us, breathed into us, comes out through the eyes, comes out through our hands. That's the soul that is animating us. This is the part of us that thinks, the part of us that loves, the part of us that can think transcendent thoughts, a part of us that has emotions. All these parts of us that are high-level parts of us are our soul. And we also understand there's different levels of the soul. We're not going to get into that, but there are different levels of the soul. But it's like the glass blower metaphor is given for who we are. God is the glass blower, blowing the breath of the neshama, of the soul, into us, that animates us, that keeps us alive. So the soul is given to us at conception. We're born into this world. We live in this world for as long as we get to live in this world. And then at the other end of that dash, at the other end, the soul leaves the body. That's death. Death is a separation of the spiritual soul with a physical body. That's death. And we understand from our sources that the soul is very in relationship to its body, and it doesn't really, like it's ready to move on, but it doesn't move on until burial. And we read that in our oral tradition, in the Gemara, it tells us that the soul is very aware of what's happening to its body until the lid is placed on top of the grave, until the body is in the ground buried. We have to be buried. A burial is humbling, and burial is returning the body to the ground from where it came, and the soul goes up into the higher realms, goes up into the lower Gan Eden. And that's kind of a holding pattern until Techiyas Emesim, when there'll be a reconnection of the spiritual soul that has been cleansed with the body that has also gone through its purification process. And these two entities that are who we are will come back together. So when we on the Chevra Kadisha prepare a lady, because ladies prepare ladies and men prepare men for modesty reasons, we are not preparing our sister, mother, grandmother, daughter for death. We're preparing her for life. We're preparing her for Techiyas Emesim. That's what we're doing. And we're very aware that the soul which has had a love affair with its body for all of however long it lived, whether it was 4.5 months for my child or 56 years for my mother or 120 years for Moshe Rabbeinu. There's a love relationship between the body and the soul. And the soul is aware of what's happening to its body. So when we walk in as a Chevra Kadisha to take care of the body, we recognize what's going on in this space. And we're very aware of that in the sense that we speak to the soul. We speak to the body. We ask for forgiveness for anything we're about to do. We pray on behalf of we ask forgiveness from her. Please forgive me for anything I might do that dishonors you. Please, God, take care of this woman, bring her up to the highest realms, cleanse her. We're trying to bring her up into the higher realms as clean and as purified as possible. And we get to do that. The living get to do that, which is huge.
Right. I've had this until this conversation. I don't know if I've consciously thought about this thing that I'm about to say, which is it was always interesting to me that, we are taught, or I have been taught my entire life that, this world is fleeting, that this is really just a corridor for the next world, and it's temporary, and basically to focus on your soul and your soul's fulfilling your soul's mission and reaching your true soul's potential, and so much emphasis on the soul. And then it has always struck me as a very interesting and also God, like Hashem in his mercy, recognizes how attached we are to our bodies. And thinking about that now as an adult, and I used to think about it as a child, but now thinking about it as an adult, I can't help but think that there is a lesson here about, whether we believe someone is right or wrong, that we still have compassion for their position. So it almost feels like an extreme act of compassion because, again, we focus on the soul. This is your mission. This is what you're supposed to be doing, but you're attached to your body. You've nurtured this body. You've loved with this body. You've hated, you've done all these things, and we want to give that some sort of, we want to acknowledge that. I think that's, to me, thinking about that now, I'm curious what you think of this notion that even though we are supposed to be more in touch with our souls, that this extreme kindness that is being done to acknowledge that this body did serve us in our avodas Hashem.
Yes. So let's focus on that. That's a great question. The soul, as we know, and there's a Gemara about this, that the body is not animated without the soul. If you see a dead body, there's no movement, there's nothing that body can do without its soul. But the soul also can't do anything in this world without its body. It's a relationship that each has with each other, that they need each other in order to exist in this world. And it's a miraculous coupling of a physical and a spiritual. They're not two things that go together necessarily. But God, in his infinite wisdom, puts this holy spiritual soul into a physical organic body, and they come into a relationship with each other where they need each other. Okay? So when we understand that we're created b'tselem Elokim, that can have many different understandings of what we mean by b'tselem Elokim. One of the understandings that we have in the Chevra Kadisha is that b'tselem Elokim means that our body has the capacity to be godlike. Every part of our body can be elevated. So when we prepare somebody for their future life, for their burial and then Tchias HaMesim, when we're preparing somebody, we are very aware of the potential that each body part has. So as we start to wash the woman in our care, we start with the head, because the head is the repository of all the knowledge, of all the divine relationships. And we think of this woman as having achieved her infinite potential, whether we knew her in life or not. So we say in many Chevras Kadisha, there are Pesukim that are said during this phase of the washing. Not all Chevras Kadisha do that, but some do. And the source for the Pesukim that we say is Shir HaShirim, the love story between God and the Jewish people. And it's a love story of the body. We're washing the body, and we're having in mind that this woman used her seichel, her knowledge, to connect to God, that she used her eyes to see good things, that when we go down the body, wash the ears, that she heard good things, that she used her mouth to speak words of Torah and pray and all the things that the mouth has the potential to do. We elevate each body part to its highest potential. We go down, we do the right side of the body next. We wash the right side because on the spheros, that's chesed, that's kindness. We do the right side next after the head. So it's head, right side. We wash the right side. We wash the arms, like what the arms could potentially do, what the compassion, what your chest, what your heart brings you to do, what your legs run to do goodness. And we do the left side of the body, and we do the front, and we do the back. It's all an orchestration of recognition that our bodies have the potential to be used in very holy and high ways. So as much as we say, yes, our bodies drag us down, and we say that, we could also say that we have the potential to elevate these parts. And we all do on some level. We've all done good things. We've all thought good thoughts and seen good things and said good things, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're very aware of the potential the body has, and we say these pasukim from Shir HaShirim in order to have the intention, the kavana that we have as Chevra Kadisha, that's what we're bringing to Hashem. We're bringing this lady in her highest potential. And so we wash her. And then we do a tahara. So tahara is a purification. It's a shining light. It's a cleansing. After we've washed the dirt off the body, and the Kabbalists talk about any kind of schmutz on the body, right? So anything that could be on your body, we're there to remove it for you, for the nifteris. And we take the dirt off because the dirt holds you down, holds you back. We're trying to release the soul. We're trying to cleanse the soul. So we're cleaning the body as an analog for cleaning the soul. The body and soul are still in relationship with each other. They're still in that room. So in silence, with love, with tefillos, we're taking the schmutz off, and then we're pouring water like a mikveh, like mayim chayim, that's going to cleanse you. And we declare, the woman in our care, as we're women, taharahi, 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 kosher, kosher, kosher. Like we've now somehow, through what we've done, because God promises in Ezekiel that he will bring cleansing with a little bit of water. So we evoke that. We're there to evoke God's promise to bring complete cleansing. And we declare that, taharahi, our woman in our care is tahor. And then we dress her in white garments that are the garments modeled after the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. The holiest time, the holiest place, the holiest man wearing the big day kahuna, right? The ones that he wore to go into the Kadosha Kadoshim. That's what we dress our dead in. We dress them in the clothing that the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur to go into Kadosha Kadoshim. Because that's what you're doing. You're going to have an encounter with a Kodesh Baruch Hu, right? And we put in, outside of Israel, we put the nifteris into a casket, which we call an aron. We call it an aron because our bodies are holy. Our bodies have absorbed holiness by being in an infinite relationship with its soul for all of its life, however long that is. There's a holiness to our bodies.
Right. So I'm just going to interrupt you and ask a question that, again, might be like the dumbest question I ever heard. I don't know. It's a risk. It's a risk I'm willing to take.
Go.
Which is, I've always sort of thought of death, the act of death, as being the ultimate atonement, like being the actual, like the purification of the soul actually comes through the death process. And so then we're talking about doing tahara. Right. And like you said, putting the mikvah waters on the body and saying, they're tahor, they're pure. And so it seems almost duplicative, right? If the act of death is sort of the atonement, then what do I need to go to the mikvah for? Right.
Well, you're suggesting that the death was going to bring about a complete cleansing or complete purification.
Mm-hmm.
So I would perhaps suggest that these are all different things that are done to bring about the greatest level of purification possible. Mm-hmm. So death is one purification process. Tahara is another.
Mhm.
And, then the living who continue to walk in the ways of the nifta by how they are in this world. We're giving tzedakah, we're doing chesed, we're donating this, we're doing that. All these things bring about a greater aliyah for the neshamas. So they're all part of the tikkun. They're all part of what needs to happen to help the soul keep getting more and more and more cleansed, or more and more and more higher up in the heavenly realms until Tchias HaMesim.
Right. So this is very interesting, and it brings me also some comfort, because there is so much that is unknown about, what a dying person goes through in terms of them being prepared to come before the Kisei HaKavod and before, their
Judgment.
Their judgment. Exactly. So, I guess one of the things that I'm wondering is, I'm trying to think back into my limited memory banks about Tanakh, and I'm trying to remember a time where preparation of a body occurred.
Right. So go to Vayachi. We just read Parshas Vayachi, the end of Book of Bereshis, and we read about Jacob on his deathbed. Right, Yaakov is on his deathbed. He's about to die, and he calls his sons, and Yosef brings the grandsons, and he blesses them, and he speaks to each of his children. That's a deathbed scenario, and he gets Yosef to promise to bring him to Canaan, to bury him in Canaan. Don't bury me in Egypt, bury me in Canaan. And at the end of the parsha, Yosef says to his brothers, don't bury me in Egypt, bury me in Canaan, which, if you remember, there's a medrash that speaks about Moshe Rabbeinu. When everybody's leaving, he's running to go get Yosef and bring the bones of Yosef with them. So there are these examples of the need to be buried. That Parshas Vayechi is sort of co-opted by the Chevra Kadisha as a time where we want to talk about this topic. But in terms of the preparation and Tahara and all these things, those things are sourced into more Kabbalistic understandings of what we're doing when we do our minhagim. Most of it's minhag, what the Chevra Kadisha does. However, I have the great honor of being part of a community of practice, which is my job. You asked me at the beginning about my job. So I work for an organization called CORE. CORE is an international organization of frum women leaders, women who do things for the klal that we at CORE want to help you be better at. So we have many communities. One branch is communities of practice. We have many communities, about 15 different communities of practice of women who do a certain practice, one of which is Chevra Kadisha. We have hundreds and hundreds of women around the world who volunteer on traditional Chevra Kadisha. So now I know what's happening in Amsterdam, and I know what's happening in Australia, and I know what's happening in Minnesota, because we're talking to each other, and it's pretty much the same. We're all doing the same, whether you're in Venice or Antwerp or London or Australia. The outline of what we on Chevra Kadisha does is the same. There's little bits of change based on the minhag hamakom, but basically we're all doing the same.
Right. So there's a aspect of the grieving process, to just jump into family and the living. Let's talk about the living for a minute.
Yep.
There's a part of the grieving process that is for the living. It's not for the dead, right? And so in thinking about that, in thinking about the Chevra Kadisha's role, how much of what the Chevra Kadisha does is for the family, for those left behind?
Right. So again, Chevra Kadisha do different things to different communities, how much they get involved before a death, after a death, and then beyond Shiva, beyond Shiva, etc. So it depends on your community where you live.
Okay.
The goal, I believe, my understanding is that until burial, the focus is on the nifta. We want to bury our fellow Jew as quickly as possible. We want this soul that's hovering around its body, that's in this kind of intermediary phase, that's anxious to get going. We want to help that soul get going. And there's other ideas about the need for the body to go into the ground as quickly as possible. But this is a rush job. We're focused on the body to be buried ASAP. That focus is there. And once we've buried, then we focus on the mourners.
Okay.
The mourners don't start mourning, quote unquote, don't start their Avelis until burial.
Right.
And then they're coming home from the cemetery, and they're coming home to Shiva, where we understand from various sources that the soul goes back and forth between the grave and the Shiva house, or the Shiva houses, that there's still a connection, that it's aware of the people who are mourning for them, that there's some relationship still with the soul of the Nifta with the Shiva houses. And
right.
Then each stage there's a aliyah of the neshama, and the people. Now, so here's why I would say that my experience of grief was very much helped by the community that took care of us. So I was 26 years old, living in a community in Washington, D.C. that's mostly young people, probably never had a loss such as ours. And they on some level, didn't know what to do with us, because we, with this young couple, had a baby that died. And they
right.
rallied in a way that I still cry when I think about it, like to receive that kindness that people, whatever it is they did, whether they did little things by like dropping off a cup of coffee or coming to Shiva and standing next to me while I'm saying Kaddish for Sam, or just sitting with us and not having to have answers to questions, why good things happen, bad things happen to good people, or just to sit with us in our sadness and say, I'm witnessing that this sadness, this tragedy, this loss is really big. And I want to be with you in that and come into relationship with you in a way that isn't trying to fix things. Because you can't, what are you going to say to a couple that just lost a baby? Like it's all for the good. No, you can't say things like that. You have to you just be in relationship. I love you, and I'm so sorry this is happening to you. And but over the course of 35 years, I've come to different understandings of, quote, where Sam went, went up into the heaven realms. But the need of, and the way in which our Jewish communities hopefully can be responsive to mourners and be responsive to people in need is something I think that we're pretty good at in the main. We come to Shivas, we sit with people, we know not to offer platitudes. And
in theory,
right, in theory. Then we come in and we are trying to bring comfort to, and we know that it's not on us, right? You're going to come in with your own grief, but when you're visiting somebody who's sitting Shiva, you want to just be with them and sit with them and let them be the orchestrator of the conversation. We had a when Sam died, it was so tragic and it was so sad, and we cried a lot, like really cried during Shiva. And people came to us all day, all night. And I think there was this couple that came around 11 o'clock at night one night, and we were so tired. We were just tired of crying and tired of being like this couple that everybody has to come visit and whatever. Anyway, so this couple walked in, and I don't know how the conversation came up, but we asked them, my husband and I asked them, like, what was their wedding like? I don't even remember how we came to that, but we asked them what their wedding was like. And they said, well, they were both children of rabbis, and they got married in a parking lot. And the wife said, I never thought I would get married. I never wanted to get married in a parking lot. And when she said that, it was so funny, because at that point, anything, we just need to break that bubble, like just need to laugh about something, and need to get out of this grief and this sadness and this depression, this dark place. And somehow that was a tickling point, and it was very funny. But anybody walking in would say, like, what's going on here? How come the Felders are laughing here? But sometimes you have to do that. You have to let people grieve in the way they can. And they say that grief is like a snowflake. Every snowflake is different. Every grief is different. Every expression of grief is different. Every roller coaster you go through is different. And as much as this was a big epiphany, actually, in our grief, my husband and I, was that we did it differently. And up until that point, we had done everything like the same together. And then when Sam died, I realized I needed to grieve the way I was finding comfort, or the things that I needed to do, and he needed to do it differently. And it was important to understand that his way was equally valid, even if it wasn't not the same as mine, and let him do him and let me do me, and yet still walk together. That was a big learning curve, was to let each other do our own grief and recognize that I can't know his grief and he can't know my grief. And yet, where do you go for comfort? For me, I look to God. God who gave me Sam, God who took Sam from us, was the God I looked to help me live again. And 35 years later, thank God, I was at Kesha, just after Sam's yahrzeit, I was invited to speak at Kesha. And I'm standing in the place where I used to daven and used to pray to God. And God didn't answer me that I wanted. I didn't have a healthy child that grew up to be a person. I didn't get what I wanted. And yet I also remembered that I prayed for strength, strength to survive, to thrive, to somehow learn to live again, learn to be fruitful and have a family, which thank God we were blessed with. So, you don't get what you want, but
Right. Yeah. So I have so many questions, and I also recognize in this moment that some of them are personal. I also recognize that this conversation is so rich and has so many nuances. I really feel like we could be here all night. And so I wanna like be a little bit strategic if that's even possible for me, but to sort of think about, well, I have a personal question to ask you, which is, you mentioned that when you first lost Sam, you in order to help you sort of go through that, you started really researching, like, what does the Jewish custom say about dying, and what is death, and what, like, all these things that you started researching, which is what brought you to the Chevra Kadisha and being involved in it and all of that. And so my question is, what part of what you learned did you find to give you the most comfort, felt more impactful to you when you came to this understanding or realization or knowledge?
Yeah, I wish I could put my finger on one thing. I think, again, going back to this concept that grief is a snowflake, and that it doesn't manifest itself the same way all the time. So some things I need to hold on to, and sometimes I need something else to hold on to, right? So when my mother died, which was only a few months after Sam died, I had an understanding, a little bit of an understanding, that her soul was in the room with her. She died on Seder night, so they didn't move her body for 2 days. So I'm sitting with my mother's body. I have an understanding that her soul is in the room, and I'm talking to her. I'm literally talking to my mother, saying goodbye and thank you for all the things, and like we do at funerals, where we know that the soul, the neshama of the nifter, is in the room listening to us. We ask for forgiveness. We ask for my mother to please go up into the heavenly realms and pray for us and bring life into our lives. Like, that was very important for me. I didn't know that when Sam died. So I was happy to know that when my mother died.
Right.
And then to understand that there is a concept that the souls of children are so pure that they go up to, like, under the kisei hakavod, whatever that, I don't even know what that means. Like, under that, then they were learning Torah with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at certain points of the day. Again, that was a very comforting thought. Like, Sam is good. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking care of Sam. He's fine. He doesn't need me. Like, I needed to be released from this need to look after him. When our children go away, we want to make sure they have everything they need. Are they wearing the right clothes, and do they have people that are going to take care of them, and they've got the food they need, and all the things that we as parents worry about our children. I worried where Sam was. Where was he? Was he okay? Did he need me anymore? Like, who's taking care of him? So that was a very comforting reality to come to understand, that he's, whatever it means, that he's under the kisei hakavod, and Hashem's learning Torah with him, and he's good, And I write in my book a little bit about some of the things that I found to be extremely comforting. So then maybe 20 years later, whatever it is, my daughter lost a baby. And I have little Leora up with Uncle Sam under the kisei hakavod. They're up there together with my mother. I don't know. These are comforting things in order to live my life, and to know. I think this is actually one of the things that I hold on to, that, again, as much as we can talk about death and be passionate about this concept, we are people of life. We are, l'chaim. We're all about living, and we're all about preservation of life, and every minute of life is infinitely valuable, and all these concepts, and we save lives. We go out of our way. We break all the mitzvahs to save lives. We do all these things because life is supremely valuable. and we're going to die, right? So we have those both things. So actually, I forgot my point. I'm not exactly what I was going to say, but I do think that letting go, on some level, I don't mean letting go of Sam, that I didn't grieve for Sam, and I don't feel sad that I don't have Sam in my life and they didn't grow up. But I found a place for him in our tradition. And I also, okay, here's the thing, that the combination of body and soul in life is temporary. Like, to really integrate that we are a fleeting, like you said, Chevra, you said, like, it's a fleeting union of body and soul. So therefore our life's a gift. Therefore we have to use it, because we don't have long, whether it's 120 years or 5 months, it's still fleeting, right? In the great expanse of time. It's a temporary, but I also was supremely comforted knowing that the separation of the living from the dead is temporary. And that gave me great comfort. Like, okay, one day, please God, it should be soon. I'll see my mother again. I'll see my grandparents again. I'll see my baby again. I'll see my granddaughter again. Like, all these people that are so meaningful and have informed my life in such profoundly deep ways are going to be, we're going to see each other again. We're going to somehow have a relationship with each other that isn't what it is now. That's
right.
comforting.
Right. So I'm thinking about like I like this idea of grief being like a snowflake, that nobody grieves the same and everybody works differently. And when we initially spoke, however long ago, you discussed your work with groups, like grieving mothers, in trying to, help them through the process. And I know that when you lost Sam initially, he was your first, so you didn't have other children. But I remember learning about that the way we grieve our loved ones is educational for our children, that they see how we grieve, like maybe even your children, because they all knew of Sam, and it sounds like you kept his memory alive, and you're very actively, you've changed so much about what you do and your mission and what all that you're connected to now.
Yep.
Because of Sam, the loss of Sam. And so your children probably learned what it means to love somebody and what it means to lose somebody, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is, and you could disagree with me, I'm just telling you what I have heard and what I have experienced, which is that when my grandfather died, he was my first death in my life. I was about 14 years old, and I looked to the adults in my life to see, like, how do we treat the dead and how do we love, the living, right? What is there that I could appreciate and acknowledge, and also what is there that I can show the people around me how much I love this person. And so, like, obviously, people who didn't know my grandfather didn't really have anything to say about him. And so that indicated less of a relationship. And those that were more torn up by his death obviously loved him very much. And so it became sort of a barometer, of how much people loved my grandfather, how much they mourned him. Okay. So I guess where I'm going with this is, have you seen in your experience people struggle to hide their grief from their family, to hide?
Yes, I think we live in a grief averse culture.
Mm-hmm.
I think we don't talk about it. So, as I mentioned, I've been now talking about this topic quite widely. I'm traveling around, I'm speaking to different communities, and after I speak, there's a line of people who want to tell me their grief stories, right? Yeah. There's people who want to tell you who died, and I want to hear those stories. Tell me who died, because people feel unsafe sometimes, not everybody, but some people feel safe sharing their grief because they feel like, oh, they should be, quote, strong. What does strong mean? Strong means I don't grieve. Actually, I think strength is grieving. To be able to feel that gamut of relationship, love, loss, continuum, to feel it is human. It's a human expression of the love that we had for this person. As you mentioned, your grandfather you loved so much. When you lost him from this world, when he moved onto the next realm, when he was birthed into the next world, you feel sad because you don't because you don't have him in your life anymore. You can't hold him, can't talk to him the way you used to. It's a loss. So we say, okay, you can only grieve, this long, and now you've got to get on with it. Yes, you've got to get on with it, and you're also grieving. So perhaps there's a possibility of holding both. It's both and. It's not a binary. It's not like now I'm done grieving and now I'm going into living. I think what I've learned is that my living holds the grief. I live because of my grief. I'm alive because of my grief, because I loved these people so much that I have a desire to seize every moment, perhaps, when I think about that deeply. So there's an idea that when Moshe Rabbeinu, when he comes down with the first tablets and he sees the Bnei Yisrael worshipping the Chet HaEgel, and he throws down or he drops, whatever happens to the luchos, they're smashed, right? So it's interesting. God doesn't fix it, put it all back together, and then glue it all back together and say, okay, here's the first luchos. Moses goes back up, comes back with the second set of luchos, but they go into the Aron together. We have the whole and the broken. The shattered pieces are in the Aron with the whole pieces. And that's our heart. Our heart is shattered and whole at the same time. Can we live with that dichotomy, with that paradox, with that? Yes, it's not all one thing, right? You live with, and I do actually think that if we allow ourselves to grieve, that's actually a stronger place. Do I have the courage to feel the feelings versus pushing them away? Rachel Goldberg Polin, mother of Hirsch, I don't know if you listened to her eulogy when they were burying Hirsch, but one of her things that she said in that eulogy was, thank you to the people who helped us, people that were with us, that were stood by us and held us. And then she said, don't leave us now. Please don't leave us now. We need you now that we're grieving. Don't run away. Like, I need you. What a strong declaration. It takes so much strength to say, I need you. Like, how much do we in our culture say, no, I got this. I'm good. I'm strong. I can take this. Well, what if you can't? And you say that, then it's might not be helpful to not keep grieving if it allows you to live. Okay. So sometimes we get stuck in grief and then we need help. And I'm telling you, I went to a lot of therapy after Sam died. I didn't know. I didn't have a belief system. I didn't know where he went. I didn't know how to deal with the huge amounts of emotion that were like literally pouring out of every orifice. I was like crying and and I needed help. But it was so intense that I had to get it. I think sometimes people can push it down and maybe there's a place sometimes to let it out. Let it out. A little bit of a time. Dr. Edith Eva Eger, she wrote an amazing book. She's a Holocaust survivor. She wrote a book called The Choice, and she's a psychotherapist, and she survived Auschwitz. She says, which I like, expression is the antidote to depression. That when we express that it for many people, not all people, it's actually helpful. Can we have the courage to express? Can we have the courage to cry? Can we have the courage to ask for help? Can we have the courage to find that one person that I can share my grief with? So healing. It's so healing. And maybe it's God. Maybe you need to go into the field, or maybe you need to go to shul, and you need to cry into your Tehillim and cry into in your relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, like where you go. But somehow I think we can't hold it. It's too much.
So right before we got on air, we discussed, the stiff upper lip, that British people have, this are known for, right? But in grieving, how the stiff upper lip could actually work against you, where you're not feeling the feelings, and it will come back. They might not come back today. You might be successful. You go back to work, and I know many people who, during critical, let's say, grieving time, they went back to work and they put it to the side, and they said, they said things that to themselves that were unhelpful, things that if somebody else had said to them, they would have probably gotten very upset about. But things like, it was their time to die, and, now their soul's at peace. And like they said, the things that they thought they were supposed to say to themselves and therefore not feel. And then later on, it became even more challenging to deal with the loss.
It's a fine balance between emunah and saying God's in control and it's on God's hands, and accepting God's ways. It's a fine line between where your relationship with God is and your human feelings about loss.
Yeah.
You're feeling grief. It doesn't mean that you haven't accepted this is God's will, but you're sad.
Right.
Okay. You can be sad and still accept this is God's will.
Right. Right. So when you work with women, when you speak to people, do you focus on your grieving process and how natural and normal it is? Do you ever talk about preparing for death? Because in the Chevra Kadisha role, it's after the fact. But do you ever talk to people who are anticipating it?
Yeah. So go back to core communities of practice. We have a community of practice for women who help those who are dying. Mm-hmm. So we those are women who are palliative care, doctors, nurses, hospice workers, people at the end of life. And what they're trying to do is encourage conversations in families. So before the person dies, they can have those perhaps difficult conversations that they keep putting off, that they want to have. They can express the love for each other. They can maybe ideally forgive each other for things that maybe have been a blockage in the relationships. Is there a way before death to fix complicated relationships so that the grief on the other side is a little easier?
Right.
Something that the end of life doulas, right? We call them doulas. Again, talking about this transition, this soul leaving the body as a birthing into the next world, right? Where it's not the end of the soul, it's moving into a different domain. Like Rabbi Nachman says that death is like taking off the garment that is the body and allowing the soul to go up. But these end of life conversations are very important to be having. And I think in our Jewish world, we're beginning to talk about a little bit more and help people have the kinds of conversations so that the death can be perhaps less complicated and the grief afterwards also less complicated.
And this is actually a topic that I have recently become very passionate about, insofar as I noticed in my work doing care management, in my personal experience, that there are times where, like you're talking about this difficult conversations where, for example, when I was in LA saying goodbye to my mother-in-law, she was diagnosed with glioblastoma, and we knew that she didn't have much longer to live. And there was resistance on part of certain family members to discuss death, to discuss what that meant, to discuss, anything to do with death. And I realized that when my mother died, there were a lot of questions that in the 15 years that she had been sick, I had never once asked her, how do you feel about dying? I'd never once asked her, what's her thought on, the next world, or what does she want her legacy to be? Or what is she, there were so many conversations that I didn't have with my mother because I don't want to talk about dying because you're not dying, and I don't want to make you think that you're dying. So let's not talk about dying. And then when I was in LA with my mother-in-law, and I did say to her, again, there was a resistance talking about dying, but I did say to her, what do you want your legacy to be? And it was an uncomfortable question to ask, but it brought me so much comfort, after she passed less than a month ago. And it brought her family comfort to know that she did have a desire to have a legacy, and what was that legacy that she wanted. And this has recently become something kind of like I've started to become very passionate. Like I get excited about these projects, and I think to myself, how can we encourage people to have these difficult conversations? Because at the end of life, when it might be too late. Like my mother-in-law had dementia-like symptoms because of the tumors in her head. And so not every day was a conversation that, like, the picture perfect, where everyone comes to say goodbye and everyone forgives each other and everyone talks about the life well lived and what her advice that she wants people to have about moving on in their grief and don't grieve, all the things that you see in these like movies and TV shows and in books that talk about, this wonderful.
But we could be having those conversations before the deathbed, right? I can tell my children exactly what I believe, exactly how much I love them. I don't have to wait till, and they say, repent the day before you die, and the answer is, well, I don't know what day I'm going to die. Could be today, right? We don't know. So let's keep that at the front of our mind. I don't know. Every day is a gift. Every day I get up and I say, thank you for waking me up. Thank you for giving me my life back. I have a day where you have faith in me. I can do something. And I think that if we can we can take death away from this morbid, dark, don't talk about it realm, which is relatively new, since deaths now happen in hospitals. They don't happen at home like they used to.
Right.
If we can reclaim conversations about death, I think we can change that. So it's not on the deathbed where you're saying, I'm sorry. You work at it while you're alive, because you don't know how long you have to live. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And we all have examples of people who, didn't
wake up.
Right. So perhaps that's work to be done at any point along the continuum of our lives. However old we are, I'm 61. I'm having those conversations when I'm healthy. I don't anticipate dying at any moment, but I know it's possible. So, and I'm very aware of the fact that we're all going to die, right? I deal with death all the time. I go into funeral homes and I watch dead people all the time. And I'm very aware that I have the gift of life, and I want to use it. And I want my children to know what I believe, and I want them to know what I stand for, and I want them to know how much I love them and all the things.
Right.
So, and perhaps the book, it was interesting when I was writing this book, which I felt compelled to write, to share whatever I came up with in order to, teach the Aleph to other people, or just to give language. Sometimes we don't have the language to describe our grief, and people can read my book and say, wow, that's what I feel, and it's like, good. I'm glad I've given language, and now you can express it too. And so I think that writing the book was also extremely cathartic. When you talk about legacy letters, or legacy box with pictures and things that you loved and all these things. So my book is my legacy on some level. Like it's like what I believe and what I've learned and what I have grown and all the things because of suffering, because of the pain of loss.
Right. And that's actually, and this is all part of one of the things I wanted to emphasize from like an adulting perspective, because I like to bring that up as much as possible, is that, death and dying are extremely difficult. You never expect it. Each death is different. Your relationship with the person is different. Even in a family, a close-knit family, each child will experience it differently. You cannot imagine what it's going to be like until you unfortunately have to go through it. And to have these conversations now, when you are, to think about your legacy, and also realize that in Judaism, we do talk about, like you mentioned, our mortality. We bring it up a lot. We say Shema at night, and we do Cheshbon HaNefesh, right? We talk about, we do Kriya Shema Lamita, and we sort of like forgive those who have harmed us, and we go through like, well, if I die tonight in my sleep, then I need to be able to be prepared for the next world. There is a component of recognizing mortality as like a real possibility,
absolutely,
maturely and with respect and reverence. And it is unfortunate that once people die is once you realize, oh, I didn't have this conversation. Oh, I didn't have that conversation. And so, as I mentioned to you at the beginning, and I'm going to tell, my audience now, that this lecture is part of a 3-part series. It is, I'm doing a 3-part series on death and dying. The first one is going to be about my experience with death and dying with my mother-in-law, who passed away on Hanukkah, and as well as, my overall experience. More it's going to be about her, but then we're going to have this conversation. This is the second one in the series. And then we're going to talk about Zaka, about Kavod HaChaim, and what, their mission and vision is in terms of having, respect for the living, just as much as respect for the dead in their work in treating, the dead with the kavod that they deserve, but also recognizing that the living are struggling with the death as well. So it's I think you have really, you have made me think in a really deep, meaningful way tonight about so much of such a difficult topic. And I'm sure that this is like you said, you're very passionate about it. It comes through loud and clear that this is a topic that you want people to talk about it. You want to create conversation around it. You want to create awareness around it. But I think what I'm mostly hearing from you is that people are not alone. That your death doesn't happen in a vacuum. Death happens in communities, with families, with loved ones, and that is what's going to help people get through those challenging times. And being engaged in whatever part of the death process, whether you're going to be menachamevel somebody, whether you're going to, make them laugh at an extremely difficult time, if that's what they require of you. However you can support them, not say anything silly, really be very careful. And again, this is incredible work that the members of the Chevra Kadisha do. And I thank you so much for sharing it. And I want to encourage everyone to read your book. Where can we purchase your book?
Mosaica Press, Amazon, bookshops, Jewish bookshops. From One Life to the Next Life, The Sacred Passage After Death.
Wonderful.
And I would also say that sometimes it's hard for us to receive other people's love, like to feel like we've got this, I don't need your help. And that's why I wanted to point out that eulogy that Rachel Goldberg-Poland gave about needing help. I think if we can receive the help, if we're able to, not everybody's able to, but that part of the community where we're probably better at giving to other people than we are receiving from other people.
Yeah.
And unless you're like plunged like I was into such deep grief that I couldn't resist, I couldn't push anyone away. Like anybody who was coming my way, I'm worried and my heart's shattered. So come on in. But sometimes it's a little bit harder. And yet I would encourage both sides. I would encourage people who have a loss to receive from other people. And I would also encourage those who feel pushed away by an Avel or somebody who they don't, just keep checking in, keep sending a note, keep dropping off coffee, whatever it is, don't leave.
Right. Yes. So I will put all your information into the podcast notes as I usually do with my guests. And I really appreciate your time, and Hashem should continue to help you in your spreading and your education and your connections with all these people. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your forecast.
Sure. You will.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Views expressed by me, your host, and my delightful guest are not necessarily reflective of each other's views, ideas, or life choices. Sometimes we're on the same page, and other times we're not.